The Galactic Military Academy floated in the empty space between three star systems. It was a massive station, built from metals that humans had no names for, spinning slowly in the endless dark. Species from 47 different worlds sent their best young soldiers here to learn the art of war. Commander Veth stood at the front of Lecture Hall 7, his forearms folded behind his back. He was a Corvania species that looked like tall lizards with scales that changed color based on their emotions. Right now, his scales were a confident gold. He had taught tactical warfare for 300 cycles, which was longer than most species lived. He was proud of his reputation. Students feared him. Commanders respected him. He had broken more cadets than he could count, and he considered this a gift. Better to break them here, in a classroom, than to let the void break them during a real battle. His eyes moved across the rows of students. There were the Thornaki, massive insect-like warriors with hard shells and powerful claws. There were the Velith, beings made of living crystal who could think faster than computers. There were the Rilkari, small and quick, with 8 legs and clicking voices. All of them sat straight and paid attention. All of them feared him. And then there was the human. She sat in the back row, almost hidden behind a large Thornaki student. Her name was Yuna, and she came from Earth, a planet that most species only whispered about. Earth was a Class 7 death world. This meant it was one of the most dangerous planets in the known galaxy. The gravity was crushing. The weather was violent and unpredictable. The atmosphere contained oxygen, which was a gas that could corrode metal and burn the lungs of most species. And the life forms there, even the small ones, were often poisonous, aggressive, or both. Veth had heard many stories about humans. They were persistent predators, meaning they could chase their prey for days without stopping. They healed from wounds that would kill other species. They ate foods that contained chemicals deadly to others. They survived in temperatures that ranged from freezing to boiling. And most disturbing of all, they had built their civilization not by avoiding danger, but by walking straight into it. But looking at this human female, Veth found all these stories hard to believe. She was small, barely 170 centimeters tall. Her skin was soft and brown, with no scales, no armor, no natural weapons. Her hands had no claws. Her teeth were flat and dull. She looked like prey, not a predator. She never spoke in his class. When he showed graphic simulations of famous battles, the blood, the death, the chaos, she never flinched. When other students gasped or looked away, she simply watched. When he asked questions designed to make cadets sweat, she wrote notes in a small book using symbols his translator could not read. She was quiet, calm, unremarkable. And this annoyed Veth more than he wanted to admit. The other instructors had warned him about humans. They said that humans were dangerous in ways that were hard to see. They said that the quiet ones were often the worst. They said that a human's true strength was not in their body but in their mind, in their ability to adapt, to endure, to keep going long after other species would have surrendered. Veth did not believe this. He believed that strength was obvious. It was in the size of your claws, the hardness of your shell, the power of your weapons. This small human female, sitting in the back of his classroom, did not look strong. She looked like someone who would die in the first 10 seconds of a real battle. He decided it was time to test her, to see what the Deathworlders were really made of. The weeks passed, and Veth watched Yuna carefully. She completed her assignments on time. Her scores were acceptable, not the highest, but not the lowest either. She trained in the physical combat sessions without complaint, even though the exercises were designed for species 3 times her size. She never asked for special treatment. She never made excuses, but she also never showed any emotion. No fear when facing larger opponents. No anger when she lost. No joy when she won. She moved through the academy, like water flowing around stones, always calm, always steady, always going where she needed to go. This bothered Beth. He had seen many cadets in his long career. Some were arrogant. Some were terrified. Some were eager to prove themselves. But all of them had reactions. All of them showed what they were feeling. Even if they tried to hide it, Yuna showed nothing. The other students did not know what to make of her either. The Thornaki ignored her, thinking she was too weak to matter. The Veloth found her interesting from a scientific perspective. They wanted to study her strange biology. The Rilkari made jokes about her, calling her the soft one and the snack. But none of them talked to her directly. Yuna did not seem to mind. She ate alone in the dining hall, choosing foods that made other species uncomfortable. Raw vegetables, cooked meat, something called kimchi, that smelled strong enough to clear a room. She exercised alone in the training areas, running for hours without stopping, lifting weights that seemed too heavy for her small frame. She studied alone in the library, reading texts about military history from dozens of different species. One evening, Veth found her in an observation deck, staring out at the stars. He watched her from the doorway, trying to understand what she was thinking. Her face was still, her body relaxed. She did not look like someone preparing for war. She looked like someone who had already seen war and survived it. He wondered what her planet was really like. He had read the official reports, of course. The statistics about Earth's death rates, its natural disasters, its history of constant conflict. But statistics were just numbers. They did not capture the reality of growing up on a world where everything was trying to kill you. He wondered if this was why she never showed fear. Perhaps when you came from a place like Earth, nothing else seemed frightening. Perhaps when you had already survived a death world, a military academy was just a rest stop. Veth made his decision that night. In his next class, he would challenge the human directly. He would give her a scenario designed to break the strongest commanders. He would show everyone, including himself, what she was truly made of. He expected her to fail. He expected her to panic, to freeze, to prove that the stories about humans were exaggerated. He had no idea how wrong he was. The morning of the challenge started like any other day. Students filled the lecture hall, taking their usual seats. The Thornaki warriors sat in the front, their massive bodies taking up 2 seats each. The Veloth strategists clustered together in the middle, their crystal bodies humming softly as they communicated with each other. The Rilkari scattered throughout the room, their 8 legs tapping nervously on the floor, and Yuna sat in the back, alone as always. Her small notebook open in front of her. Commander Veth entered the room exactly on time. His scales were a calm blue, but his eyes were sharp and focused. He walked to the center platform and stood there for a moment, letting the silence grow heavy. "Today," he announced, his deep voice echoing off the walls, "we will not study theory." A ripple of tension passed through the students. Everyone knew what this meant. Veth's practical demonstrations were legendary at the academy. He would choose a student and put them through a scenario so difficult that it would expose every weakness, every fear, every limitation. Last cycle, he had left a Thornaki cadet with a shattered shell and a broken spirit. The cycle before that, a Veloth student had flickered out completely from the stress, requiring 2 weeks of recovery. "I will select one of you," Veth continued, "for a tactical challenge. You will have no time to prepare. You will face a scenario that I have designed personally, one that has broken commanders with decades of experience." His 4 eyes swept across the room, moving from face to face. The Thornaki clicked their mandibles nervously. The Veloth dimmed their glow, trying to become invisible. The Rilkari pressed themselves low against their seats. Then his gaze stopped on the human in the back row. "Cadet Yuna," he said, "you will participate." The room exploded with whispers. Students turned to look at the small human female. Some of them looked confused. Why would the commander waste his time on such an obvious target? Some looked pitying. The poor creature would be destroyed. A few of the Rilkari made chittering sounds that translated roughly to laughter. Yuna closed her notebook. She stood up slowly, her movements calm and controlled. She walked down the steps toward the center platform, passing rows of students who stared at her with various expressions. She did not hurry. She did not hesitate. She moved like someone walking to a meal, not to an execution. Beth watched her approach with growing interest. Most students, when called for a challenge, showed signs of stress. Their bodies tightened. Their breathing changed. Their eyes moved quickly, searching for escape routes or sources of help. But this human showed nothing. Her heartbeat, which his enhanced hearing could detect, remained steady. Her body stayed relaxed. Her face held no expression at all. She reached the platform and stood before him, looking up at his towering form without any sign of fear. The scenario, Veth said, activating the holographic display with one of his forearms, is the siege of Karath 7. The display flickered to life around them. A planet appeared, brown and rocky, with a single settlement visible on its surface. Red dots representing enemy forces surrounded the settlement in a massive ring. Blue dots representing friendly forces were gathered inside a tiny cluster compared to the sea of red. You command a defensive force of 200 soldiers, Veth explained. The enemy has an invasion fleet of 3,000. You have limited ammunition enough for perhaps one major engagement. You have no reinforcements coming. Behind you is a civilian population of 50,000, including children and elderly. They cannot be evacuated in time. He zoomed in on the settlement, showing the details. Simple buildings. Basic defenses. A few anti-aircraft weapons. Nothing that could stop a determined invasion force. You have 30 seconds to present your strategy. The room went completely silent. Every student understood what they were seeing. This was an impossible scenario. There was no way to win. The numbers were too unequal, the resources too limited, the situation too desperate. The best a commander could hope for was a noble death. Yuna studied the display. Her eyes moved across the terrain, the enemy positions, the resource counts. She did not speak. She did not move. She simply looked, taking in every detail with the same calm expression she wore in every class. 15 seconds passed. The other students began to shift in their seats. Some of them felt sorry for her. Others were glad it was not them standing on that platform. 20 seconds. Veth's scales began to shift toward a satisfied purple. He had seen this before, the paralysis that came when a mind faced a problem it could not solve. The human would freeze, just like all the others. She would stammer an answer that made no sense, or she would admit defeat. Either way, he would prove that the stories about humans were nothing but exaggeration. 25 seconds. The Rilkari students began chittering again, anticipating the failure. 20-8 seconds. Time is, Veth began. I poisoned the water supply, Yuna said. Her voice was quiet but clear. It cut through the room like a blade, silencing every sound. Veth stopped. His scales flickered through several colors before settling on an uncertain gray. Explain, he demanded. Yuna pointed at the holographic terrain. Her finger moved to a river that flowed through the valley below the settlement, a river that led directly to where the enemy would need to establish their forward base, not the civilian water supply, she said. The natural river feeding into the valley. According to the planetary data, Korath 7 has native plants including something similar to what my people call lotus root. But this version produces a chemical that affects Stranathi respiratory systems. She tapped the display, pulling up the enemy fleet composition. The invasion force is 70% Dranathi ground troops. The chemical is not toxic to most species, so it would not be detected by standard screening. But within 6 hours of exposure, the Dranathi soldiers would begin experiencing breathing difficulties. Within 12 hours, they would be unable to fight. Within 24 hours, half of them would be dead. The room was frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. Veth stared at the small human female in front of him. His scales were cycling through colors he could not control: shock, confusion, something that might have been fear. That is only the beginning, Yuna continued. I would also split my 200 soldiers into 5 smaller units. She was not finished. She was just getting started, and for the first time in 300 cycles of teaching, Commander Veth had no idea what would come next. Yuna stood in the center of the holographic display, surrounded by glowing images of terrain and enemy positions. Every eye in the lecture hall was fixed on her. Every ear was listening. Even the Thornaki, who usually looked bored during tactical discussions, had leaned forward in their seats. 5 units, she repeated, moving her hands through the display to mark positions. 3 of them will be harassment teams. Their job is not to fight directly. Their job is to make the enemy afraid. She drew lines on the map, showing movement patterns through the rocky terrain. Humans can operate effectively on 4 hours of sleep. We can do this for weeks if necessary. Most species need 8 hours or more. If we attack the enemy camp every night, hitting supply lines, communication equipment, officer quarters, we force them to stay awake. We force them to watch the darkness and wait for attacks that come at random times. After 3 days of broken sleep, their soldiers will be exhausted. After 5 days, they will start making mistakes. After 7 days, some of them will begin to break mentally. Commander Veth's scales had turned a pale color that none of his students had ever seen before. He opened his mouth to speak, but Yuna continued before he could form words. The other 2 units will fortify the settlement's choke points. She pointed to narrow passages in the terrain where the mountains came close together. These positions are not meant to hold forever. Nothing could hold forever against those numbers. But they can slow the enemy down. They can make every meter of ground cost blood. She looked at the resource counts on the display. Ammunition, food, medical supplies. All of them were low. All of them were low. All of them were running out. We re-ration everything. We make the enemy believe we have more than we do. We set traps using local materials. We create the appearance of strength, even when we are weak. A Velith student raised a crystalline hand. But what is the goal? They asked, their voice like wind chimes. You cannot defeat 3,000 with 200. The mathematics do not allow it. Yuna turned to look at the student. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, something old and tired and knowing. The goal is not victory, she said. The goal is cost. She turned back to the display, zooming out to show the entire planet and the invasion fleet in orbit. The Dranathi are not unified. Their fleet is made up of ships from different factions, each one controlled by a different political leader. They came together for this invasion because they expected an easy victory. They expected to land, crush the defenders, take the resources, and leave. They did not expect a fight. Her voice was calm, almost soft, but every word carried weight. When the ground forces begin dying from the poisoned water, the commanders will argue about who is responsible. When the night raids make their soldiers afraid to sleep, the different factions will blame each other for poor planning. When the choke points hold longer than expected, they will start counting the cost, not just in soldiers, but in time, in resources, in reputation. She held up one hand, fingers spread. 46 hours. That is how long a Dranathi commander will wait before requesting reinforcements. after losing 40% of their forces to what looks like a mysterious illness and a stubborn defense. And when they send that request, they admit weakness. Their rivals in the fleet, the other faction leaders, will see an opportunity. They will delay sending help. They will spread rumors. They will let the commander fail so that they can take their place. The room was completely silent. Even the constant background hum of the station seemed to have faded. "We do not need to defeat the enemy," Una said. "We need to make them defeat themselves. We need to make the cost of victory higher than the value of what they came to take. When losing becomes more expensive than leaving, they will leave." Commander Veth finally found his voice. It came out rough, like stones grinding together. "And the civilians? The 50,000 behind your lines?" Una's expression did not change. "They survive. That is the point. Everything I described, the poison, the raids, the delays, it all buys time for the civilians to survive. In war, survival is victory. But your soldiers," Veth pressed. "The 200, they would be sacrificed. They would fight knowing why they fight," Una replied. "They would die, if they die, protecting something real. That is not sacrifice. That is purpose." She looked directly at him, and Veth felt something he had not felt in decades. He felt small. Not physically, he towered over the human female. But in some other way, some deeper way, he felt like a student standing before a teacher. "On Earth," Una said quietly, "we have a saying. We do not inherit our world from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. Every choice in war should be measured by what it leaves behind. What future does it create? What does it protect?" She turned off the holographic display with a simple gesture. The lights dimmed, leaving only the ordinary illumination of the lecture hall. "Your scenario was designed to create despair," she said, "to show that some situations have no hope. But hope is not about odds. Hope is about choice. The defender in your scenario can choose to lie down and die, or they can choose to make the enemy pay for every centimeter. They can choose to give their people one more day, one more hour, one more minute of life." She walked back toward her seat, her footsteps soft on the metal floor. "I would choose to fight. Not because I would win, but because the fighting itself matters. Because the enemy would remember. Because the next world they think about invading, they would hesitate. They would remember the cost." She sat down and opened her notebook again, as if nothing unusual had happened. The lecture hall remained silent for a very long time. Finally, Commander Veth spoke. His voice was different, now quieter, less certain. "Class is dismissed early today. We will resume tomorrow." The students filed out slowly, still processing what they had witnessed. Many of them glanced at Una as they passed, looking at her with new eyes. The small human female from the death world did not look up. She was already writing in her notebook, recording notes that no one else could read. But everyone who had been in that room would remember this day, and they would never think about humans the same way again. 3 days passed after the incident in Commander Veth's class. The story spread through the academy like fire through dry grass. Everyone was talking about the human who had solved the unsolvable scenario. Different versions of the story floated through the corridors. Some said she had threatened the commander directly. Others claimed she had used some kind of deathworld magic. The truth was strange enough, but rumors always grew in the telling. Una ignored all of it. She went to her classes. She completed her training. She ate her meals alone in the same corner of the dining hall. Nothing about her behavior changed, but Commander Veth could not stop thinking about what had happened. He found himself reviewing the recording of that class again and again. He studied her words, her movements, her calm expression. He researched the tactics she had described, the poisoning, the harassment, the psychological warfare. All of it was documented in human military history. They had been doing these things to each other for thousands of years. On the evening of the third day, he went looking for her. He found Una on Observation Deck 12, a small platform on the outer ring of the station. It was a quiet place, used mostly by species who needed solitude to think. Through the transparent walls, the stars stretched out forever, millions of points of light against the infinite black. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the void. She did not turn when he approached, but he knew she was aware of his presence. Humans had excellent hearing, despite their small ears. "The strategy you presented," he said, stopping a few meters away from her. "It was not in any textbook I have read. And I have read many textbooks." "No," she agreed. "It was not. Where did you learn to think like that?" For a long moment, she did not answer. Veth waited, his scales shifting through uncertain colors. He was not used to waiting. He was not used to feeling like the less powerful one in a conversation. Finally, Una spoke. Her voice was softer than usual, with something heavy underneath it. "I learned it from my family. From my people. From my planet." She turned to face him, and Veth saw something in her eyes that he had not seen before. Not fear. He had known she did not feel fear, at least not in the normal way. This was something else. Something deeper. It looked like an old wound that had healed, but never stopped hurting. "My grandmother," Una said, "survived something called the Guangzhou Uprising. It happened in my country, on my planet, before I was born. The government sent soldiers against its own people. Many died. My grandmother was young, then just a girl. She hid in a basement for 3 days, while the violence happened above her. She heard the screaming. She smelt the smoke. When it was over, she walked out into streets covered with blood." Veth's scales went pale. He had studied human history, but the statistics had not prepared him for this. "My grandfather," Una continued, "was born during a war that split our country in two. A line was drawn across the land, and families were separated forever. He never saw his brother again. He never knew if his brother lived or died. He carried that loss for his entire life, like a stone in his chest that he could never put down." She looked back at the stars. "My mother grew up during an economic crisis that destroyed families. Companies closed. People lost their jobs, their homes, their hope. Some of them chose to end their own lives rather than face the shame of failure. My mother watched her own father work himself sick trying to provide for the family. He died young, worn out by the struggle." Veth said nothing. He could not think of anything to say. "My father," Una said, "worked 18 hours a day so that I could have a future. He missed my childhood. He missed my school events, my birthdays, my growing up. He gave his time, his life, so that I could stand here, in this station, among the stars." She turned to face the commander fully. Her eyes were dry, but something burned in them, something that made his scales ripple with involuntary reaction. "Humans do not come from a death world because our animals are dangerous or our weather is harsh. We come from a death world because we learn to be the disaster. Every generation, we survive something that should destroy us. War, disease, famine, economic collapse, political violence, natural catastrophe. We face it, and we endure, and we teach our children what we learned." She touched the transparent wall, her reflection ghostly against the stars. "We write it into our bones," she said. "We carry our ancestors with us. Their pain becomes our strength. Their survival becomes our instinct. When I looked at your scenario, I did not see something impossible. I saw something familiar. I saw the same problem my people have been solving for 10,000 years." Veth's scales had settled into a deep violet, a color of respect among the Corvani. He had not consciously chosen this color. His body had chosen it for him. "The other instructors warned me about humans," he admitted. They said your species was dangerous. I did not believe them. I thought they were exaggerating. I thought that a species so small and soft could not be a real threat. And now? Yuna asked. Now I understand that I was the one being tested. He paused, struggling with words that did not come easily. Your scenario answer was not just a tactical solution. It was a message. You were telling all of us what humans are. Yuna nodded slowly. We are what our world made us. We are what our history shaped us to be. We are survivors. And we will do whatever it takes to keep surviving. She smiled, a small expression that held no joy, only a tight acceptance of truth. When you live on a world that is always trying to kill you, you learn to be very good at not dying. And you learn that sometimes the only way to live is to make death too expensive for your enemies. Veth looked at the small human female standing before him. He thought about the millions of humans on Earth, each one carrying the same weight of history, the same instinct for survival. He thought about what would happen if they ever came into conflict with the wider galaxy, for the first time in 300 cycles. Commander Veth felt something that might have been fear, and also, surprisingly, something that might have been hope. Thank you, he said finally, for teaching me something I did not know I needed to learn. Yuna bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect in her culture. Thank you for listening, she replied. Most species do not. They stood together in silence for a while, watching the stars turn slowly past the window. Two very different beings from two very different worlds, sharing a moment of understanding. It was the beginning of something new. Word of what happened in Commander Veth's class spread through the Galactic Military Academy like a wave spreading across water. Within a week, every student, every instructor, every maintenance worker on the station knew the story. The human female who solved the unsolvable scenario. The Death Worlder who looked at a legendary commander's greatest challenge and responded with the cold logic of a species forged in endless struggle. The story changed in the telling, as stories always do. Some versions claimed that Yuna had threatened to fight the commander personally. Others said she had revealed secret human weapons technology. A few wild tales suggested she was actually a human war leader in disguise, sent to spy on the academy. The truth was stranger and more frightening than any rumor. She was just a student. Just one human. And she had shown them what her entire species was capable of. Yuna noticed the changes immediately. Students who had ignored her before now watched her as she walked through the corridors. Thornaki warriors who had dismissed her as too weak to matter now stepped aside to let her pass. Velith strategists who had considered her a scientific curiosity now treated her with careful respect. In the training areas, others asked to spar with her. They wanted to test themselves against a Death Worlder, to feel what it was like to face a species that had evolved through constant competition. Most of them were surprised by what they found. Yuna was not stronger than them, not physically, but she was relentless. She did not give up. When she was knocked down, she got back up. When she was hurt, she kept fighting. She seemed to have no limit to her endurance, no point at which her body or mind would simply stop. A young Grilkari named Tiki began following her around the station. Tiki was small even for her species, a compact creature with bright eyes and 8 quick legs. She had been one of the students who laughed at Yuna before the incident. Now she was desperate to understand how such a small creature could contain such vast inner strength. How do you do it? Tiki asked one day, catching up to Yuna in a corridor. How do you stay so calm when everything seems impossible? Yuna looked at the little Rilkari with patient eyes. Practice, she said. And history. When you know that your ancestors survived worse, your own problems seem smaller. But what if my ancestors did not survive worse? What if my species has always been safe? Then you learn from species that were not safe. Strength can be taught. Endurance can be developed. The body follows where the mind leads. Tiki thought about this for a long time. Eventually, she asked Yuna to teach her, to show her the training methods humans used to build their impossible endurance. Yuna agreed, though she warned that the training would be difficult. It was. Tiki nearly quit many times in the following weeks. But she did not quit. And slowly, day by day, she became stronger. Meanwhile, Yuna's reputation continued to grow. Her roommate was a Corvani named Resh. When they had first been assigned to share quarters, Resh had been terrified. She had requested a transfer, afraid to sleep near a Deathworlder. The Academy had denied her request. There were limited rooms available, and species mixing was considered important for building interstellar cooperation. For the first month, Resh had barely spoken to Yuna. She had stayed awake at night, watching the humans sleep, half expecting her to attack at any moment. But the attack never came. Yuna was quiet, clean, and considerate. She kept her belongings organized. She did not make noise after lights out. She even shared food, sometimes strange human dishes that smelled strong but tasted interesting. Slowly, Resh began to relax. She started asking questions about Earth, about human culture, about the strange things Yuna wrote in her notebook. Yuna answered patiently, never seeming offended by the questions, even the ignorant ones. By the time of the incident in Commander Veth's class, Resh and Yuna had become something like friends. After the incident, they became closer. "It must be uncomfortable," Resh said one evening, her scales warm orange with affection. "Everyone staring at you. Everyone talking about you." Yuna sat on her bed, reading a message from home on her personal device. The message was from her mother, Junji, who still lived in a city called Bizon on Earth. Every week, Junji sent a new message filled with worry and love and traditional recipes. "It is uncomfortable," Yuna admitted. "I did not come here to be famous. I came here to learn. But you showed them something important, something they needed to see. What did I show them?" Resh's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a Corvani expression of deep sincerity. That strength is not about size or natural weapons or armor. It is about refusing to stay down. It is about choosing to keep going when everything says you should stop. Yuna set down her device and looked at her roommate, her friend. "On Earth," she said, "we have billions of people. Each one carries the same history I carry. Each one has ancestors who survived impossible things. If one human, small and unarmed and alone, can think like this, what could a billion of us do?" Resh felt a shiver run through her scales. It was not fear, exactly. It was all mixed with something else. Anticipation, perhaps. The sense that she was witnessing the beginning of something significant. "What would a billion of you do?" she asked. Yuna looked toward the window of their quarters. Outside, the stars stretched on forever, countless points of light, representing civilizations that had built empires while humans were still learning to make tools from stone. "Whatever it takes," Yuna said quietly. "For as long as it takes, until there is nothing left to fight." The message from her mother glowed on the device beside her. Junji was asking when Yuna would come home to visit. She was asking if Yuna was eating well, sleeping enough, making friends. Normal mother questions from a normal woman on a world that the rest of the galaxy considered a death sentence. Yuna thought about her brother, Dohyun, who was still on Earth. He was younger than her, still in school, still dreaming of the future. He wanted to follow her to the stars someday. He wanted to see what was out there, beyond the sky. He would come eventually. And when he did, he would carry the same history, the same weight, the same endless capacity for endurance. More humans would come after him. They would spread through the galaxy, quietly and steadily, the way water fills every available space. They would seem small and soft and harmless. They would work alongside other species, learning their ways, adapting to their environments. And deep inside, they would all carry the same fire, the fire of a species that had looked at a hostile universe and refused to die. The fire of persistent predators, of survivors, of people who had turned every disaster into a lesson and every defeat into a stepping stone. The galaxy did not understand yet what was coming, but they would learn. They would all learn. Eunice smiled to herself and began writing a reply to her mother. Outside, the stars turned slowly past the window, indifferent and eternal. But they would not be indifferent forever. Someday, humans would reach those distant lights. And when they did, they would do what they had always done. They would survive. They would adapt. They would endure. And nothing in the universe would ever be the same.